Okay guys, so in the last episode we set up some modules and we're going to continue with that, but we stopped at the problem of an external dependency. What happens when your module needs something externally? Well, that's a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new module called context module. Okay, and we're going to annotate that with that module. And we're going to make our provides method to provide our context. Now, when you have an external dependency, let's say it's a dependency on the system or the activity or your application context, what we're going to do here is we're going to provide the context in the constructor of the module. So we're going to make a private final context like so, and we're going to add a constructor parameter, and then in here we're going to say return context, and I've spelt that wrong. So what's happening here is when we go to create an instance of this module, because we're going to need to do that in a minute, we'll give that to Dagger, and then Dagger will do all this for us. That's great. So we've multiple modules now. We need to add all the modules, by the way, to the component in order for the component to read them all, because it can't read submodules, or you can do submodules as well. But we won't do that for now. We'll just say network module dot class and then context module dot class. Now here's a little bit of a problem. That's great and all, and now we can read everything. But this GitHub service module, if you look at it here, why can't we actually don't have a JSON module yet? One trick you can do is you can actually say includes, and you can say network module dot class, okay? And then you can actually remove network module from this point here. And then inside our network module we can say includes context module dot class. So you'll see here what's happening is the includes basically says I need this module needs this module, which needs this module. So your modules become their own dependency tree. We're going to need a JSON, which will be done inside here. We don't have JSON, so we'll just say public JSON. Now, if anyone's wondering, why don't we just shove everything into one gigantic module? You can do that. There's nothing wrong with doing it. However, try and manage it. I've done that before, and I've ended up in a massive situation where I had lots of problems because when you have everything in one module, you end up with a module with 500 or 600 lines and dependencies flying all over the place, and it just becomes very unclear as to what's going on. So our context module is already in our network module. So the last thing we need to do is we need to do Picasso. So we'll create a new module for Picasso. We'll annotate with app module. And then we'll say app provides public Picasso, and then we go to our application. This is our last little bit of dependencies. I'll say return. So this requires a context. Now the context we're working here is application context. So this module will need to say includes context module dot class, because that's where I need to get the context from. We're also going to need our network module. That's the wrong type of bracket there, Patrick. Well done. Dot class. Great. And then we can just say, okay, HTTP client, done. Now I want to separate this downloader into a new provides because it's technically a dependency and it's a good practice. Perfect. So now we need to add our Picasso module here. Great. Let's hit the build button and see what happens. One of the great advantages of Dagger 2 is that it tells you your errors at compile time. So this has been compiled. Let's take a little peek at what the compiler did. Well, you'll notice here we have all this generated code. So if we look at where this file actually is, it's inside our build folder in here. So it's generated all these extra code files. Now the code itself in here is a little bit complicated, but it's not too bad to follow. Basically you have providers which return your actual dependencies, and Dagger has figured out the correct order to initialize everything. So if we have a look here, right, at our various providers here, so this initialize method is where the actual stuff is set up, the order is set up. You'll notice context sits at the top because context is used below. You'll notice that the modules are always used underneath each other. You see all the usages are always flowing down the chain. And that's exactly what we want. This method sets up everything. Well, that's great. We've got our code, we've generated everything, all our dependencies have vanished out of here. So this is where we need to start with our setup. So in order to utilize what Dagger has generated, we need to create an instance of our component. So our application will say GitHub application component, which is our component, equals Dagger application component dot builder dot. We need to give it its context module, so new context module, this, because it requires a context, dot GitHub service module, I didn't put new in front of it because I'm very stupid. Okay, I've made a hack of that. Let's just type it. So we've got our GitHub service module, dot network module, dot Picasso module, and then we say dot build. Perfect. We've got our component. And then we can just access those methods, because if you look at our component, these are our methods. These are providing our stuff. This is our bridge. So then we can just say GitHub service equals GitHub service dot, that is very stupid, you say dot component dot get GitHub service dot get Picasso. That's really cool. Now one thing you might notice here, look at this. We've got all these creating the instances of all the modules. This is a bit tedious. Imagine you have a massive dependency tree and you've grouped your modules sensibly, and you've got, Jesus, you might end up with 50 or 60 modules. I've seen projects with over 25 modules on Android. Imagine this in a server, it'd be very big. You'd have thousands of lines of this. Well, here's a nice thing about Dagger. You only need to include modules that have constructor arguments. So if we look at this method, you'll notice here by default, look, when we call build, if any of these modules are null, it will create an instance for them by default. Okay? So these are ones without a constructor argument, it will just call that. However, the context module, it doesn't know how to create a context module at all. It says, oh, I don't know. What the hell's a context module? I don't know how the constructor argument works. So that's why it has this little error exception here. It'll throw an error. So we have to call context module on it, but we don't need to set any other ones because they have default constructors. And thus we can get rid of these lines of code. All that code for generating our dependencies is all gone. Poof. It's all hidden in Dagger. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what's the actual advantage of this? I can just code all this up myself. I'm a master coder. Imagine you need to insert something into that tree. Imagine you've got a big complicated graph and you need to put something in the middle. Let's say in our network module we suddenly need let's say this cache file needs to be used somewhere else. Well, we'd have to, in a normal old way of doing it, we'd have to organize the creation of the dependencies and manage all that. And then imagine you've got in our actual component here, you've got, Jesus, imagine you've got, I've seen things here with 15, 16 and small apps. I've seen bigger apps go upwards of 30, 40, 50 dependencies down along here. Imagine you've got all those dependencies. You need to create and manage instances of all of them, and it would take forever. So that is creating dependencies. Now in the next video, we're going to talk about qualifiers. Actually, we're not going to talk about qualifiers. We'll talk about that in a later video. We're going to talk about scoping. And scoping is considered one of the more complicated and difficult topics of this series. So see you next time.